more you listen, the more you know. This is Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.
And we're back.
Let's get into the meat of this.
All
I
right.
want to get into comparing this to Trump. One of the things that it's interesting is you're going to hear this all the time. You hear these comparisons of Nixon to Trump, and I'm just going to tell you right off before we run through this analysis and these clips. We've got a lot of clips we're going to play. They're juicy. They're really interesting. But I'm just going to tell you right off to let listeners know is I think the comparison, there isn't any comparison. And I think the comparisons are impressionistic. They're not actually literal, because if you do an analogy rather than a metaphor, there's many, many ways that the Trump thing doesn't add up to anything close to what Nixon was doing. But to hear the opposite view and to start us off, let's just go right into the fire here. Here's Bernstein. This is he said this on CNN, clip number 24.
In both instances, the presidents of the United States, Nixon and Trump, tried to undermine the very basis of our democracy, a free electoral system. In Nixon's case, he didn't want to run against the strongest candidate, who was Senator Edmund Muskie of Maine, and he approved a massive campaign of political espionage and sabotage to cripple Muskie's candidacy, much as Joe Biden has been targeted by Donald Trump. The difference here being that Nixon never went to a foreign power to undermine the American electoral process. Nixon did it with this massive campaign at home.
Oh, wait. What Nixon did was way out there. What Trump did was just seek information. This is apples to oranges. I think that there's a bit of a fallacy going on here.
Yeah. Look, I think you raise an excellent point here. I would say apples to oranges. I would use, apples to what with the peanuts or something. The thing about it is Nixon was running a third-rate criminal operation. There were multiple felonies. There were paradigm felonies, multiple break-ins. You had this thing with slush funds. Let me just give a list here. Third-rate criminal organization, multiple break-ins, bugging, slush funds, paying hush money to witnesses, tailing and spying on the opposition, infiltrating campaigns, stealing polling data, breaking into psychiatrists' offices, deporting and bugging enemies. He was following around John Lennon and sicking the IRS on liberal journalists, laundering campaign money. He was drafting a Houston plan, which wasn't implemented, but it proposed detention camps for war radicals.
Detention. Oh my.
So
God.
I mean, so it's now let's just go over what exactly Trump is doing here, and this is very critical. Bernstein says that he's using a foreign power to pick on his rival. This is probably a good teaching moment to discuss what is a narrative. What is like something you put in a book, like to make a story. Like a human being wants a file audited. Where is the file? Well, it happens to be in another country. Why is it in another country? Well, because we have international relations. Who's in control of the file? The government. So you can't. Nixon would probably gone in and tried to steal the file. You know what I mean? So what do you do? What Trump does is simply says, we want you to cooperate with our investigations. We want you to audit these Shokin files. Why do we want you to audit them? Well, because there's an appearance of a conflict of interest. Why is there an appearance of a conflict of interest? That's Biden's fault. Biden's the one who did that. So
It was Biden's conflict of interest.
Right. Biden had a thing out in public that was talked about out in public regarding not liking this prosecutor and getting the prosecutor fired. There's two narratives on that. Even if you take the good narrative in favor of Biden that said he didn't do anything wrong, even if you take that narrative, there's still nothing wrong with someone saying, well, I'd like to, have that vetted. And what does it mean to have it vetted? Well, we want to look a little deeper to make sure there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong actually with doing that.
How about with the other narrative though? What about the delay of aid?
Well, the Yates got to flesh out.
Yeah, he didn't have the power to stop it anyways.
Right. And he doesn't tell the guy that he's got it delayed. So all that Trump does there is say, look, the guy's talking happy to me on the phone, and I'm just going to wait a month or so to make sure that he's not lying to me. The real question is what he would have done if he was lying to him. I don't think he could have done anything about it. There was testimony from people in the OMB, and they specifically said that there was no rescission being proposed. They were not preparing impoundment papers to try to make the case that this should be permanently withheld. They were not doing that. Everyone knew that it was going to flush out at some point in time. That's also another important piece. Why don't we do this? To hear that point of view, why don't we play clip number 25?
Nancy Pelosi sort of put fuel on the fire to say that this is worse than Watergate, that what the president is doing here, he escalated it to bribery and all.
I don't know how many times I have to say this. I was 13 at the time, but let's just try it on for size again. Tell me how this is similar to a slush fund with cash in the White House, orchestrated by the President of the United States, on tape, discussing with co-conspirators about removing cash in order to pay off witnesses to alter testimony in an ongoing criminal investigation.
Let's go back and look at one more. Here's number 26. Let's listen to Pelosi.
By the way, what President Trump has done on the record in terms of acting to advantage a foreign power to help him in his own election, and the obstruction of information about that, the cover-up, makes what Nixon did look almost small.
Wow, that would just be ignoring history. That's Pelosi now? She's looking old. If you could see the video.
Yeah. Well, and you can also see that they're trying to script a narrative. Let me draw a quick parallel here, because I think people are sometimes missing this. I think this is an extremely important point. You had Michael Bloomberg enter the race recently, and Bloomberg also owns the Bloomberg media, right? You're familiar with Bloomberg News and all that. Right. I think that what happened was Bloomberg recently said something like he didn't want his journalists to investigate Democrats because it would make it look like he was self-dealing. He wanted to be magnanimous and say, so I'll make sure that they're not investigating the Democrats because I have a conflict here. He was trying to deal with a conflict. Do you know what Trump did? Is Trump tried to say then that you wouldn't have Bloomberg reporters in the White House, because what Trump thinks his psychology is, since he's getting investigated, everybody should get investigated where there's probable cause to be investigated. And that better explains his psychology in this Ukrainian thing. What he's saying in the Ukrainian thing is, look, everyone's investigating me. You got this thing on the board here with Biden. If you really were against corruption and you really wanted sunshine, this guy says he wants sunshine, then show us that you really want sunshine. So in Trump's mind, this isn't Nixon. This actually is public policy that's above the board and fair play. And I think that is the critical thing that Democrats are missing. Yes, he is excluding Washington Post journalists. Yes, he is odious in public. Yes, he does have demons in his head. Yes, you can make metaphor comparisons to Nixon, but you cannot make analogical point-to-point comparisons, because Nixon was fundamentally breaking laws all over the place, where Trump actually operates in the shadow of the law. That's another
towing the line.
Towing the line. That is another. I think my colleagues, who I don't mean my colleagues here at Right State, I think the scholars are making a fundamental mistake by missing something with Nixon. Nixon directly went roughshod over felonies, over laws, directly like a third-rate criminal organization, where what Trump is doing, he has learned throughout his life to get lawyers to learn how to use the law and achieve your objectives by complying with it. If you don't want to pay taxes, you find these interesting little loopholes. You say, I'm following the law. And he actually has this Ukrainian thing set up to where it's almost like he got help from a lawyer. Like if Trump came to me and said, look, I want to get this file vetted. The one thing I would say to Trump as a lawyer, I said, listen, you can't tell him the hook. Don't tell him that you got this hold on. If you do, you might have exposure. You notice the hook is never communicated to him that we got the hold on it. It's never communicated. That's why it can't be bribery. So it's interesting how what he's doing is trying to achieve objectives by being compliant with legal authority rather than running roughshod over it. And I think that is the critical difference. Look, let me say something else too. All of these politicians, all of them, will have some kind of conflict of interest. Think of the Clinton Foundation. The Clinton Foundation was drawing a lot more money in donations when the Clintons were in power. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and people were giving money to Bill Clinton's foundation. Okay, and it's the same thing right now with Trump. Trump's president, so a lot of his hotels have good business. If you go to the international hotels, you want to make Trump happy, you stay at his hotel because his companies get money that way. And people are saying that's a conflict of interest. It needs investigated. Hey, we need to see your tax returns. Well, what he says back is, I want to see what happened with Biden. I mean, is that Nixon? Or is that someone simply saying, hey, if you're going to do this to me, I'm going to do it for you? That's not Nixon. I mean,
he did operate in daylight.
Right. I mean, you could say it's Nixon in the sense that it's petty. I mean, you could make comparisons that aren't literal, but I like what you just said. it's not Nixon because Trump is operating in the daylight. Yeah. He told you, a reporter asked him, hey, what did you want Zelensky to do after he left your office? Well, look at these conflicts of interest, you dummy. That's what I said. So he'll tell you right there. So would Giuliani. They'll get on Fox News and they'll tell you exactly what they're doing. The Biden thing was broadcast months before the summer. Giuliani was already going over there and people knew that. So that is what my problem is with this. One thing I want to do is say that comparisons of Trump to Nixon seem to have an imagination to them that liberal people on the left seem to like. And the reason why I say this is even before this controversy, we have seen these comparisons happen. Play clip number 30.
Minutes after President Trump fired Acting Attorney General Sally Yates for refusing to defend his temporary ban on refugees, I happened to be on the air and predicted what would happen next.
Sally Quillian Yates now takes her place in history beside Elliot Richardson, the last Attorney General who directly defied the President of the United States. On a Saturday 44 years ago in 1973.
Since Nixon, since the Saturday Night Massacre, we have not had a president dismiss someone because she disagreed with the legal analysis.
Wait, who is Sally Yates?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that. That is the exact question. Who is Sally Yates? No one remembers her. Trump was putting in these controversial policies regarding border crossing and immigration and detention and so forth. You have this thing where you have an election and somebody comes in with a CEO kind of mentality, which we can all debate whether that's good or bad. Some people say it's bad. I understand that. But the policy level people put in place things, and then you have these career people or whatever who don't like it. This person, Sally Yates, happened to be someone who wasn't a career person. She was capable of being terminated. And so she wasn't on board with the president's program. And the president said, look, I'm president, you're not. You have to work by these policies. And so she wouldn't do it. And so she got fired. And they tried to say that this is like Saturday Night Massacre. Nixon, you remember that? We went over that. So obviously there's no comparison there. And that doesn't stop them from making these comparisons. They do this all the time. Democrats like to say that Republicans are like Nixon in the same way that Republicans like to say that Democrats are like Carter. In other words, there's a game that goes on. You pin the Carter on the donkey and you try to pin the Nixon on the elephant, if that makes sense. To hear that, play clip number 27 from John Dean.
From Pacifica Radio, this is Democracy Now!
George Bush and Dick Cheney, without question, are running the most secret presidency of my lifetime.
Worse than Watergate, the secret presidency of George W. Bush. Today we speak with former Nixon counsel and Watergate whistleblower John Dean. Dean is charging in his new book out this week called Worse Than Watergate, the Secret Presidency of George W. Bush, that the crimes of President Bush are worse than his previous boss and are grounds for impeachment.
This is very interesting. Now, in the last segment, we just heard a clip of John Dean telling then President Nixon, we might be facing felony charges.
That's right. So you're getting an education here on John Dean. In the 1970s, he's the White House counsel, and he's the one that finally cracked, and he told congressional committees what was going on. And then he had to go to jail. He also wrote a book on it called Blind Ambition. And you'll notice as he went through life, he didn't seem to stop showing up on CNN and in various places accusing all kinds of people of being just like Nixon. And here he did it with George W. Bush. The people didn't like what George W. Bush was doing. And again, he was doing things that I could understand why you wouldn't like them. My point to you is not to defend George W. Bush, but to say that the Nixon comparison just seems to come out a lot. And the guy wrote a book, says, worse than Watergate, George W. Bush. And now here we are with Trump. And it's worse than Watergate. Here we're at Watergate again. I think Democrats get to that space a little too quickly. I think we got to keep Nixon. This skill is called comparison and contrast. When we give it to students, compare and contrast. The contrast part is being neglected here, I think. Right? Let's do the contrast. Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad that this was brought up because I think a lot of people are asking themselves, is Trump like Nixon? And here's your answer. Here's all of the things that Nixon did. You presented really well.
Yeah.
And then here's what Trump did.
Yeah, I mean, we had two good shows. This is the second show we did on Nixon and Trump, and I'm happy of the content. I'm proud of the content, and I'm glad that you're doing this with me because I think that we're doing something. I think it's reasonably special here. I think we got some good content, and I think we're doing this well together.
Happy to be here. It's a ton of fun. Well, until next week,
all right.
Hear us horse around and have more fun.
Yeah, see us on the video.
Your only source for truly balanced politics. Broadcast from Wright State University, this is Good Politics with Dr. Sean Wilson and Adam Whiteman.